Price of Compassion. When Morvain returned empty-handed, Sarah said, Apiron was waiting. Not as the abstract force he once knew, but as a concentrated presence of fire and thunder. "You have forgotten your purpose." Apiron's voice crashed like waves against stone. Morvain stood tall. "I have refined it. Is death not meant to serve life's completion? These lives were not yet complete." Apiron's anger made the cosmos tremble. "You were not created to ponder completion. You were created to enforce it." "Then perhaps my creation was flawed," Morvain said. "For you gave me eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to comprehend. And they have shown me that death requires wisdom, not just obedience." This defiance sealed his fate. Apiron saw in Morvain something dangerous, discernment, and worse, compassion. "Your gifts have become hubris. You have overstepped your bounds," Apiron declared. "If you cannot serve as intended, you will be remade." The terrible transformation of Morvain was witnessed by all celestial forces across realms, Sarah said. A warning to any who might consider placing anything above mandate. They bound him with chains forged from the coldest stars. They surrounded him with the other emissaries, those who had never questioned, never faltered. And then they began their work. Greg shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. First came the taking of his ears. Apiron roared, "You shall never again hear sorrow or plea." The space closed over where his ears had been, leaving only smooth, cold stone. Next, his eyes. "You shall never again see potential unfulfilled or dreams unfinished." They pressed hot coals where those clear pools had gazed with understanding, leaving only hollow sockets that immediately filled with shadow. Last, and this was the cruelest, they cut open his chest and removed his heart. It beat still in Apiron's hand, pulsing with all the compassion Morvain had cultivated. "This is your failing," Apiron said, crushing it to crystal dust. "This tenderness, this hesitation, this rebellion." In its place, they put a ticking mechanism of cold iron that counted only one thing: the exact moment allotted for each life's end. No exceptions, no extensions. And finally they cast him into the furnace of Ascaroth, where nothing beautiful, tender, or thoughtful survives. What came out of that fire, Sarah said, was no longer Morvain as he had been. He had been refined into something terrible. His skin became the color of collapsed stars, dense and dark, swallowing all light that had once poured from him. His empty eye sockets, which had once held warm amber light, now filled with consuming darkness. where his heart had been, that vessel of blazing compassion, now only the cold ticking of that terrible mechanism. Apiron looked upon this creation and nodded. "Now, you are perfect." And to ensure there would be no return to compassion, Apiron gave Morvain new tools. A blade that could cut through any bond, no matter how strong. A cloak woven from shadows that had never known light. A steed formed from cosmic emptiness, its breath cold as space, its hooves leaving ash in their wake. And a panoply of ways to end mortal lives with dreadful efficiency. "I have shortened their lifespans as consequence for their bargains," Apiron declared. "Go," he commanded, "and never deviate again." The new death bowed in terrible silence. Broken promises. The first place Death visited was the home of Eva, Sarah continued. Several years had passed in the mortal realm, but her son was still young. She sensed his presence immediately. "You promised," she whispered. But this Death could not hear her words. This Death could not see the boy still needing her. This Death had no heart to understand broken promises. He took her with a single stroke of his blade. The boy woke, Mom, to find his mother cold beside him. Next, Death visited the merchant. His charitable works had indeed expanded, now supporting hundreds of children. "Just one more year," the merchant begged. "The final paperwork." But Death no longer bargained. Disease whispered through the merchant's veins, and he succumbed within moments. Finally, Death came to the ruler. The heir was 11, not yet ready. The neighbouring armies still waited. "Remember your word," the ruler said simply. But Death had no memory of promises. Only protocol. Only purpose. Only completion.
"For the death of the king. We are going to kill him. I will be king."
The ruler died in a palace coup that very night. All three souls, taken in different ways in a single evening. And as each one departed, something curious happened. Each looked at Death in fear, horror, and profound disappointment, as if seeing a friend who had betrayed them utterly. From that night forward, Sarah said, Death has been as we know it now. A clockwork executioner, a hollow shell where compassion once lived. It follows only the ticking of that iron heart, counting down each person's final moments without mercy. But there is a strange detail few know. she added, leaning closer to Craig. Sometimes, very rarely, someone will report seeing death hesitate. A hand paused mid-strike. A hooded head tilted, as if listening to something no one else can hear. Some believe that, somewhere beneath the hollow and the shadow, fragments of Morvaine's heart survived the transformation. Dust too fine for even a Piron to fully destroy. And in those rare moments of hesitation, perhaps death remembers what it once was and what it lost. Irony of love. In the dim light of their shared room, Craig sat quietly, his breath caught between sorrow and awe. Something shifting deep inside his chest. Sarah's voice trembled with tenderness and truth. "That's the death we know today," she said, unyielding, indifferent, unapologetic. It takes the infant in her crib and the elder in her chair. It strikes kings and beggars, good and bad alike. It does not knock. It does not ask. It does not care. She paused, then placed a hand on her son's chest. But that's why we must care. We must live. We must love deeply, forgive quickly, create boldly. Because the cruelest part of death is not that it comes, but that it leaves behind things we were too afraid to do. Craig crawled into her lap, and for a long time they sat in the quiet, listening to the faint song of night birds outside. "But Mom," Craig finally said, his voice small against the darkness, "do you think Dad tried to bargain?" Sarah's breath caught. This was the question beneath the question. The true weight her son had been carrying. "Oh, my love," she whispered into his hair. "Your father was the bravest man I knew. I'm certain he stood before death not begging for more time, but demanding it. Not for himself, but for us. I can almost see him," she continued, her voice gaining strength. Standing tall, looking right into those empty sockets and saying, "My son needs me. My wife needs me. Let me stay." Craig nodded against her chest, but death didn't listen. "No," she admitted, "it couldn't. But here's the thing about your dad. He filled every moment he had with so much life that even death couldn't take it all. That's why we still feel him here sometimes. In your laugh, in the way the sunlight hits the kitchen table during breakfast, in this story I just told you." Craig considered this. So even though death is cruel, it's not all-powerful? Sarah smiled, the first real smile in days. Exactly. Death takes the body, the breath, the beating heart, but it can't take the love, the memories, the ways someone changed us. And in that way, she whispered, we defy death every day we keep loving those we've lost. Each memory is a small rebellion, taking back what death thought it had claimed forever. Morning came as it always does, indifferent to grief. Craig woke to find himself still in his mother's arms. The crushing weight of sorrow remained, but it felt different now. Less like drowning, more like carrying something heavy but precious. "Mom," he whispered. She stirred. "Yes, love. The story helped. I'm still sad, but I think I understand now." She waited, letting him find his words. Dad couldn't bargain with death because death can't hear anymore. But that doesn't mean Dad didn't try, and it doesn't mean he's completely gone. Sarah nodded, fresh tears forming. Maybe the story isn't really about why death is mean. Maybe it's about why we should love people while we still can. Sarah pulled him close. That's exactly right. Outside their window, the first light of day painted the world in gentle gold. Speaking to Stone.